You ready to go? Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Third and final section, we're dealing with liberalism, but we're going to deal with it from the point of view of its underlying assumption and premise and how ideology affects viewing Islam and religion, specifically the ahkaam of the Shariah. And it's important to understand this because in the modern day context, people have accusations about Islam that come from a liberal bias. So if you remember, liberalism, generally speaking, is a disputatious set of doctrines. And essentially, its key philosophical assumption is, and this is contested generally speaking, but if you think about it, its key philosophical assumption is atomism or individualism. Professor Charles Taylor says individualism is primacy of the self. Maroni Freedom, as I said, she says that individualism is viewing the self as an abstract entity devoid from social obligations and attachments, which is kind of the opposite of communitarianism or communal obligations. And when we see liberalism from that perspective, we understand it's an individualistic doctrine. But because of the liberal hegemony, they say liberalism is universal, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is actually is literally a project. It's a liberal project. Professor John Charvet, in his book, Human Rights and the Liberal Project, or the Liberal Project and Human Rights, I forgot which way around it is. He was a professor, is still a professor at the London School of Economics. He makes a point that the UN Declaration of Human Rights, or the Declaration of Human Rights, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is actually a liberal project. It's a liberal conception of rights. They have an underlying liberal premise, individualistic premise, and they are prioritized from an individualistic perspective. Because there are some rights that we would claim are rights, but they're not even in there in the first place, or they're not as prioritized as such. So we can't just allow the hegemonic ideological structures and ideologies just to enforce this so-called, set of rights or moral doctrines on us just because they have the power. We should be able to unpack and challenge them. But essentially, it's an individualistic perspective. It's based on individualism or atomism. And we know Islam is not like that because we have the rights of the individual, hukuk al-ibad, hukuk al-nas, the rights of the servants, the rights of people. We also have the rights of Allah. We have the rights of the family, the rights of society, and laws pertaining to how to deal with social obligations and individual obligations. So it's a complementarian system. And we know this from various ahadith and ayat, but one that comes to mind, which I think is quite powerful, is the famous hadith concerning the upper deck and lower deck and the people on the boat. And the upper deck are giving water, fresh water to the people at the lower deck. But the upper deck stop giving water and the lower deck actually start making a hole in the boat to get some water, but they all sink. So this hadith teaches us many lessons. And one of the lessons include that individuals affect society, society affects the individual. So this is very significant that we don't have an individualistic doctrine. We don't see the world through the primacy of the individual, the primacy on the nafs, which really is really egoistic, isn't it? Yeah. Again, the thing that we spoke about earlier, it's like almost the celebration of the ego, the celebration of the nafs, and we see individualism at play. Now, one would argue that liberalism is not really a moral doctrine; it's more about rights, for sure. But there are connections because ideology affects your moral worldview as well and how you see morality. Especially if you see it from an individualistic perspective, when your moral laws and commands and divine commands addressing the kind of intricate link between individuals and society and individuals. If you're going to see it from an individualistic liberal perspective, then you won't see it the way we see it. You won't see it from a complementarian, holistic sense. You'd reduce Islam to one ruling and you see it from the premise of a liberal perspective, an individualistic perspective. So this is something very important to understand. When you understand this about liberalism, then you'll understand why liberals attack Islam in the way that they do and why they have certain biases when they basically attack the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And let me give an example. This is the case study that I use a lot. Women's inheritance. Women's inheritance. You see this on Google. You have the liberals and the liberal feminists. They'll say, hey, you guys don't treat your women equally and you don't value your women the same as you value men because a woman gets half the inheritance of her brother. Simple. That's what they say. Now, we need to understand that they have an ideological bias when they're actually making that claim. Because remember, it's the primary say on the self. And liberals, generally speaking, they say man and woman are equal in every possible way. Because we just refer to the individual. The individual is equal to any other individual irrespective of gender. There are no social obligations and attachments for the individual. It's just you, the individual. So they see it from an individualistic sense. Also, they may ignore, because of this ideological bias, any communal obligations or roles of responsibilities. So they'll see the ruling through an individualistic lens. That's why they say it's not equal and you think women, there's something wrong with them. So what we need to do is expose or say to them, you're coming from an individualistic liberal perspective because you're not seeing the communal obligations at play here. You're not seeing this law holistically with other laws. And you're assuming that each individual is equal to another irrespective of obligations and attachments. But we believe that male and female, yes, they're equally spiritually, but they're very different with regards to the roles and responsibility in society. Something you would reject because you come from an individualistic perspective. And we would say this, when you study Islam holistically without individualistic bias, and you allow Islam to speak for itself, you would see that inheritance law is based on two main principles. Number one, the proximity to the deceased, and number two, your roles and responsibilities. So when you see Islamic law in that communitarian way, in a non-individualistic way, allow Islam to speak for itself, you would see that, okay, when the father passes away and there's a son and a daughter gets half of the son. But it kind of makes sense because the son now has an obligation that the father had, which was to take care of the daughter, which is food, shelter, and clothing. So the son's bankrupt and the daughter has all the money, even if it's half. And she is under no obligation to give it to anybody. Because the maqsad, the goal of the Sharia is to economically and socially emancipate and free a woman. Because we honor women, unlike these individualistic morons who want to strip women naked, right? That's what they do, especially liberal feminists. You know, there's not much noise about the French abaya, but there's lots of noise about what happened in Iran, yeah? Because they just want to strip you naked. Because they objectify women. But that's a different topic. So, can you see what's happening now? But if you see it holistically, from a complementarian perspective, from a non-individualistic perspective, from a non-liberal perspective, allowing Islam to speak for itself, you see the beauty of the Sharia coming out. In actual fact, in around 16 cases, women get more than men. And in around 4 cases, they get the same. So this is a good case study to show a liberal individualistic bias when it comes to the Sharia. And you could expose the same thing when it comes to the hudud, the Penal Code. And they say, oh, this is barbaric, you know, because we don't have that individualistic bias. We know that individuals affect society, society affects individuals. And they miss that link because they don't see the impact on society. They just see it from an individualistic perspective. Now, that can be kind of crude because they also do see a consequentialist role in some of these issues. Like, you know, what are the consequences of this person doing this action for sure. But generally speaking, it's not considered primarily from a foundational perspective. We consider it from a foundational perspective. There is that link. There is that relationship between the individual, society, and the individual. And, you know, when it comes to the Penal Code, say, for example, take, I don't know, cutting the hand of the thief. Now, from a liberal bias, like, oh my God, barbaric. Because they'll zoom in just on the individual and they'll say, you're cutting his hand. For what? Just stealing? One, they don't understand Islamic law. 2, they see it from an individualistic perspective. They have that liberal bias. That's about his right. The primacy is on the individual, his rights, at the expense of community rights. Do you see? So what we say to them, look, you've misunderstood Islam because 1, you're ignorant, 2, you're liberal, and you have that individualistic bias. But let me teach you what Islam actually says. These punishments, the intent is not really to enact them in a way. It's seen more as a deterrent policy. It's a deterrent policy. The structure of society prevents crime in the first place. But they don't have that view because political liberalism, generally speaking, or social liberalism, they believe that that the government can't have a conception of the good life. It can't propagate moral values. And they argue there must be a marketplace of moral values where human beings come and compete to see which moral values are the best. Islam rejects that. They say, no, there are some moral values that we're going to propagate in society. So that's one layer. They don't have that layer. The other layer is that we're going to have mechanisms in place in society to prevent crime in the first place. They don't, because they don't see society as affecting the individual, generally speaking, or the individual having any obligations to society. It's just the individual. So they'll forget about structures. It's all freedom. For us, we say, no, we'll have structures in place to prevent crime in the first place. Like Allah says, do not approach zina. When it comes to, poverty, we'll make sure everyone has food, shelter, and clothing, which is an obligation of the state. You'll have social moral values propagated at school level, at the masajid level, at the political level, at the social level, at the media level, to show people that stealing is haram, stealing is not good. And the society will be structured around that it would not agitate people to steal. So you won't have avid materialism. You won't agitate the nafs to make them identify with things that they can't afford, that this is what makes them who they should be. Right? Do you see my point? So there are structures in place that prevent crime in the first place. Then on top of that, you have a legal system that is very robust, that you have certain conditions, that it's not just beyond reasonable doubt. Because if you have some doubt, then you can't inflict the punishment. And you have due process and law and lots of conditions in place. So I think there are 19 conditions for cutting the hand of the thief. It has to be above a certain value. It has to be done in public. It has to be witnesses, and so on and so forth. You have to be over a certain age. You shouldn't have done it because of hunger. Otherwise, it's lifted from you. So there's all of these nuances. And then on top of that, you have the suitably harsh punishments based on all of these structures. But these structures don't exist in liberal society because they have that liberal bias. They don't have a conception of the good life, generally speaking. They won't have structures in place to prevent crime in the first place. Do you see my point? And maybe the legal system is a little bit less stringent. When it comes to the hudud, we're more stringent because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. If there's it's better to release 9 guilty people than have one person be inflicted with punishment. And that's why in the Sharia courts, I've heard that sometimes the scholars would say, wink, wink, you were married, weren't you? Yeah, when it came to zina. Any excuse, right? Because the whole role of this punishment is to be a deterrent. Do you see the point? And we see in Islamic history, man, only 14 people got their hands cut in a period of God knows how many years, which is phenomenal. And so if you don't have that liberal bias and you allow Islam to speak for itself, it will make sense. Okay, I get it. It's a suitably harsh punishment because you have all of these layers in society already in place. Values that are cohesive, that you propagate, mechanisms in place to prevent crime in the first place, a stringent legal system, conditions that are almost impossible to inflict the punishment in the first place, and then the deterrent. Do you see what's going on here? Liberalism won't do that because it's just about the individual. Do you see the point? Same with zina. So you have to, lash the unmarried zina or stone to death. The conditions are almost impossible in order to enact them. I remember one sheikh was speaking to a non-Muslim about this. He said, look, and he was saying similar things. Do you know you have to 4 pious witnesses, that they have to have the same kind of testimony. If it's slightly different, it's not valid. And they can't look into someone's private home because it's illegal or haram to look into someone's home. Therefore, you're not a valid witness. Technically, it has to be done in public. And you have to see the pen going the ink. Yani. That doesn't even happen in the United States. And then the guy said, you know what the guy said? The guy said, if the guy gets caught and punished based on these conditions, then he deserved it. That's what the non-Muslim said. So it's seen, the philosophy is a deterrent philosophy. Now, if you see it from the holistic Islamic perspective with all of these layers in society and so on and so forth, robust legal system, stringent rules, stringent criteria, deterrency, this, that, and the other, then at least you understand it. So we want to get the liberals to stand in the possibility that your liberal bias is wrong. Suspend that bias, suspend individualism and a liberal bias, and allow Islam to speak for itself. And then you see at least it's valid and holistic and workable. So these are two case studies to show how the individualistic and liberal bias affects, ideology affects how you view Islamic morality, Islamic laws. And that's a very, very powerful tool to consider when you're looking at liberalism and Islam and all of these related issues. So, we didn't have much time. We could have spent more time on liberalism and LGBTQ+ and atheism, but I think we've done enough to give you certain key principles so you could continue your intellectual and spiritual journey. You know, these are designed to plant the seeds so you can continue. I'm not saying I haven't given you everything. I haven't responded to all detractions. I haven't given you the full academia because we have limited time. But I think it's been designed in a way that it's enough to plant the seed in your heart and mind so you could be active and continue your journey. Let's take some questions.
I want to about the atheism. I learned that the Jews believe in God because they believe that Musa has seen the God, or he has a talk with the God. And the Christians believe in the God because Jesus announces the doctrine or the state of the God. And Muslims believe in God because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them that there is a God. So there is no logic behind this. Only these three nations, the three ahkaam, believe on their prophet and believe in God. So, what is the atheism people cry about this idea?
Yeah, that's not true, because Allah says in the Quran that if you were to ask them, the Quraysh, the Arabs, who created the heaven and the earth, they say it is Allah. So they already believed in the creator of the heavens and the earth. They already had that belief. So Muslims didn't believe in a creator just because the Prophet told them. And so that's one thing to acknowledge. Yes, we believe in Allah with these names and attributes and Tawheed because of revelation, because the Prophet ﷺ carried the revelation of the Quran. But we don't believe in that just because he said so. We believe in it because he said so, and we know he is speaking the truth, and we know the Quran is from Allah for rational reasons. So that's how we would present it to them. We say, yeah, we can prove to you that there is an uncreated creator using our aql, you know, the argument from contingency, the argument from dependency, the argument from design, and so on and so forth. But then after, in order to believe that it is Allah with these names and attributes, and this conception of oneness and tawheed and so on and so forth, you could kind of rationalize it in a certain degree, but you need revelation. And we could prove revelation. We could prove it in two ways. We could prove the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ, and we could prove the Quran being from Allah, that there's no naturalistic explanation to explain the authorship of the Quran. Obviously, we don't have time to explain that now, but that's a method in order to allow you to bring people back to that strong foundation. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
So my question is, you talked about three things, like liberalism, LGBTQ+, and atheism. I do understand the relationship between atheism and liberalism and LGBTQ+. But is there any relationship between atheism and LGBTQ? Because how I see it, when you talk about like atheism, it's sort of built upon some scientific assumptions and all of that stuff on a very basic level. When you talk about LGBTQ, it's literally negating all of those things.
Yes. No, so there is a relation between atheism and LGBTQ+.
This is one.
Yeah, sorry.
Number two is when you talk about the West is sort of forcing this narrative on us, it's a fire that's going to burn that society as well. So when you look at the West, you see that things such as that kids are being given hormone like blockers now. So these things are also going to affect them.
Yeah,
so what's the bigger idea behind it? Why are they pushing these things, not just in Pakistan, but also in their own societies? Like, what's the idea behind it? Because when you see atheism and liberalism, you see where there's a point where it's stemming from. There's an initial basis. What's the initial point for LGBTQ ideas?
Yeah, it's Shahawaat. It's Shahawaat. That's, in my view, is you could reduce liberalism and postmodernism and LGBTQ plus ideology to literally Shahawaat. Allah made this clear. Who could be more astray than the one who follows his desires? Have you not seen the one who takes his own hawa, his own blameworthy desires as his Lord? It's just purely Shahawat. And that's what happens. You end up destroying yourself.
So they're happy destroying their own societies as well.
Well, they're so blinded by the Shahawat, they don't care. They don't care. Some of these people don't care. As long as I create a framework where I can do whatever I want, no one's above me. I am my own Lord. And you see it in their faces. You see it in their attitude. You see it in their relationships. These people are very sad people. They don't have loving relationships with people. It's purely shahawat. I don't even think they know how to love anymore. That's how bad it is. If you look at relationships in the West, like literally. And that's why I really, really, really suggest, and this is a controversial statement, controversial statement. If your daughters, by the way, women should be educated. We need women doctors, gynecologists, nurses, teachers. Let me put that out there, yeah? Because I get misunderstood. But if your daughter, her vision is a great vision, she just wants to be a wife and a mother, which is the greatest vision for a woman in Islam, whether we like it or not, yeah? You're a queen. You're a queen. You're doing a great job. You're building the ummah. You're the first protector of the future mujahids. And you're the first teacher of the ulama. Allahu Akbar. What an honor. Yeah? And that's why we would start a war for a woman, wouldn't we? So the point here is, if a woman just has that vision, do not go to university. Waste of life, waste of time. Because especially in Pakistan and in the West, if you go to the West, you're going to be infected with secular liberal ideologies. You're more likely to have shubuhat. You won't learn much anyway, with all due respect. If you won't. I've been in academia for years. I've done a postgraduate certificate in philosophy, a master's in philosophy, a master's in research in philosophy, and now I'm finishing my PhD. I'm not saying this to blow my trumpet. I'm just saying to you, I've been there. I know it's bakwas. It has its own metaphysical and epistemological assumptions. Some people don't like this because a lot of the brothers, when they go academia, they think there's someone special. Wallahi, one ayah, learning and the tafsir of it is more important than all the 8-9 years I've done in university. Khalas. Yeah. Khalas. So you need to realize that. Don't fall for the kind of Asian Pakistani trap that, I want to show that my daughter's educated and she has a status now. This is all bakwas. It's social slavery. You guys care so much what people think. You're a slave to people, not to Allah sometimes. It's unbelievable. If you want to protect your children, if her vision is that, then it's best that she just learns 3 years deen. She'll learn more critical thinking. She'll be more intellectual. She'll be ilmi, and she'll have ruhaniya, spirituality to instill in her children. This is what you definitely should do. Otherwise, you're throwing them into what? Potential hellfire. Because there are challenges at universities. Like even in Turkey now, even under Erdogan, you go to the secular universities, some sisters go in with hijab, they leave with no hijab. I mean, in the grand cosmic scheme of things, was it worth it? From a liberal secular perspective, it's worth it. From a utilitarian perspective, it's worth it. From a Islamic perspective, is it really worth it? Because in the grave, is Allah going to ask you if you did a psychology degree? Is Allah going to ask if you got A's or B's? Tell me, you're the ulama here. Tell me, is Allah going to do that? So why are we focusing on this as if it's part of our identity now? And I've realized amongst practicing families, we've misaligned the moral priorities practically. Practicing families, they will be more angry if the child failed an exam than if a child missed Fajr. And then you're complaining why our children not take the deen seriously is because the children listened with their eyes, not with their ears. Reap what you sow. And many of our sisters go to liberalism or feminism. Some of them, and it's not an excuse, but we have to understand why they're doing it, is because our ulama class are not implementing the Sharia properly. How many women in Pakistan get inheritance? Maybe 10% or less. 1%. Because the ulama class and the brothers with beards, and I go to tabligh and I do this and that, the other, they don't follow the Sharia. With all due respect, I'm going to be clear on this. Whoever does that, you're a coward, you're not a man. Because the Prophet said, to be a man, you need to have courage and not to be stingy. You stole from your sisters, you're stingy, so you're not a man. You're supposed to have qawwam, taking care of your women, financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually supporting them, and taking leadership. You're not doing that, you're not a man. And you know people in your home that have done this, or in your families, and you've said nothing, so you're all cowards. I'm sorry to say. Sorry to say. But you only know one language. You need to be woken up a bit, yeah? Or shaked. Wake up! Yeah? But it's true. And this is stealing from your sisters. You have stolen from your sisters, Yani. How can you live your life like that? Like, think about it. What kind of weasel must you be? What kind of weasel must you be? Like, I'm Greek, right? From a Greek background, but I'm British, obviously. But like, even thinking of stealing from my sister, I'd rather cut my hand off myself slowly with a blunt knife. And you guys are supposed to have the deen and religion and Shariah and beards and dari and topi and this. Yani, you steal from your sisters. That's why I don't take people seriously anymore, how you look. You could look like the Prophet ﷺ. I'm not going to take you seriously. I want to know how you react when it comes to the Sharia. I want to know how you react when fitna happens. I want to know how you react when you have to be fair and just. I want to know how you react when it comes to following the law of Allah, when your nafs is at play. That's a real man. Oh, but I pray 5 times a day. I don't care. If you got food, shelter, and clothing, these things are easy. You test character when fitness strikes. Do they come closer to Allah? Do they run away from Allah? And unfortunately, it's a pandemic in this country and in the UK amongst our Muslims that our women are it's daylight robbery. That's what it is. It's daylight robbery. Do not tell me you've done it personally, because we'll be fighting outside of this place. I will fight you. I will fight you because I'm defending the honor of our sisters. You've dishonored our sisters. So I'm ready to fight. And be scared, because I know how to fight. Sorry for this language, but if I'm not going to say it, and it's easy for me, I appreciate, because I'm an outsider. I'm a mehman. You have to have akhlaq with me. You have to tolerate me. I know if a Pakistani said this, you'd be getting slippers. You'd be getting chaplis. Yeah, like, what are you saying? Yeah? He was saying, chup, chup. Pagal. But it's something that we should take seriously. Because maybe we have this fitan ideologically in what's happening at home, because we give our own people trauma. You know? Okay, so next question. About UN Charter of Human Rights. When the questioner approaches from the perspective of absolutely agreed upon rights, how to counter the conscious and unconscious validity, underlying validity, as well as the question of fearing from accepting religion's moral superiority, how to answer this? That's a very good question, because it's become part of the social discourse now that this is like the absolute human rights. The way to do that is to basically talk about its origins. If you find out about the origins of the liberal conception of human rights, you'll find out that actually it was developed. Yes, there happened to be a consensus amongst liberal countries, but you need to say to them this. Since when was human consensus the basis for absolute morality in the first place? You don't want to follow that line, because you'd be in big trouble in 1940s Germany. There was a quasi-consensus that it was okay to kill all Jews. So you want to unpack the underlying logic of what they're trying to say. Also, you should say to them, because it was developed over time, and because it was based upon the liberal hegemony and powers that developed this, then it's going to have some kind of bias. And you should say to them in a humble way, stand in the possibility that the current conception of human rights are not absolute, because consensus doesn't lead to absolute morals or absolute rights. Because for rights to be absolute and objective in that nature, they have to be mind independent, not dependent on some kind of quasi-consensus. Secondly, understand that because it was developed via the liberal world order, if you like, you don't want to use such terms, it sounds conspiratorial, but it was developed through liberal nations and secular nations, then it's going to have a secular liberal tinge to the priorities of these rights, the application of these rights, and even the conception of these rights. Stand in that possibility. And then what you should do now is say, look, here are some rights that we would agree with, but this is how we would apply them. And these are some rights that you haven't mentioned that we want to mention because we believe it comes from a true source. And I would like you to stand in the possibility that this source, which is the Quran and the Sunnah, are actually true. And if you want, I could show you why they're true. So if you have that type of conversation, you could unpack it. But like with all scenarios, it's very hypothetical. What you may need to do is basically listen with the intention to understand. So you understand their context. Because the sunnah of giving dawah to individuals is to individualize them and to understand the context. Understand their meaning, not just their wording. Be committed to the goodness and their guidance. So you ooze a sense of empathy and you ooze a sense of, I don't have any undeclared negative intentions. And you use hikmah, which is part of dawah. وَدُعُوا إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ. With what? With hikmah. And what is hikmah? Having an Allah-pleasing goal and you apply your ilm in that particular context. You have to know what the ilm is. You have to have an Allah-pleasing goal, which is, getting them to become Muslim, inshallah. And you have to understand the current context with regards to the ideas and who that person is. Once you do that effectively, then hopefully your language and your body language and your framing will be done in a way that achieves that goal. Jazakallah khair. Let's take 2 more questions. It's getting late. Because there's pizza here, it's getting cold, and I have to go back. And it's a busy day tomorrow as well. And I've had about 4 sessions today. So have some rahmah, yani. So let's take 2 more questions. Yes, sir.
How do we answer the question that some liberal plus LGBTQ people say that the interpretation of the verse which forbids us from same sex, they transcript as Allah was talking about rape and not the consensual sex. They basically misinterpret the ayah a lot.
I get that. So yeah, they do. So remember, ideologies will try and make religion align with this ideology. Like liberalism and secularism, they have this fake inclusivity, this fake tolerance. Because there's boundaries to tolerance, to every ideology and worldview. And we say, well, who has the right to draw that line to the boundary of tolerance? Is it you or Allah? This fake inclusivity. Because when you study practically liberal and secular nations, they only accept religious minorities as subjugated versions of themselves, ideologically dominated versions of themselves. They're not allowed to express themselves as they are fully, and they're not practically accepted. They're only accepted as liberalized versions and secularized versions. Yeah? That's one thing to understand. And that's why they were making an attempt to liberalize the tradition. Oh, that ayah doesn't mean that. Well, if you know it's a false interpretation, then explain to them why it's a false interpretation. Simple as that. Tell them your interpretation is not normative, not orthodox, not based on our rules of interpretation for the Quran. It's not aligned with any understanding of usul tafsir. And just say to them, well, with all due respect, I'm not going to take your interpretation. Oh, mufti, all of a sudden you've become a mufti or a scholar. Who are you? And these things are so clear in the Quran and the Sunnah that the whole rape allegation just breaks. Yeah. And you are ulama, just tell them what the valid interpretations are. Simple as that. Give them 10. His Ibn Kathir, his Qurtubi, his Tabari, his Maturidi, his this, is that. Give it all to them and say, oh, well, yeah, what are they going to do? And then sometimes you shouldn't even allow them to have that discourse. What authority do you have to even make such claims in the first place? Linguistically, scholarly, and otherwise. You have no authority. So why would I take you seriously? So just turn the tables that way as well. I'm a Maulana. Tell them. Let me teach you what this ayah actually really means. It's like basically, my 11-year-old child going to the doctor and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Let me tell you how to treat cancer. What you need to do is get some soap and you mix it with some salt and you basically take it at 3 p.m. every day. You're going to laugh at the kid. That's what they're doing. You're the doctor in this situation. They're the 11-year-old. Don't let them have this hegemony over you. Say, what are you talking about? Shut your mouth. All right. Next question. Yes, Sheikh.
Sheikh, just for inspiration or learning that, how did you move from being that convert to what you're doing now, mashallah? And, what was that turning point, the scholar's route, and how can we do it right from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what motivates me? I'm very skeptical about many questions like this. I don't know why, like, you know, my children or my wife would ask me, what's your favorite color? And I'm like, it depends what mood I'm in. Yeah? So my wife might get a dress for home. She's like, do you like my dress? Yeah, it's lovely. After 2 weeks, what were you wearing? She's like, I can't get it right. I was like, it was my mood. It depends. Like, my moods change that way. Even so, sometimes with questions like this, it's like, it's hard even to understand my own motivation sometimes. Maybe that's waswasa. I don't know. But look, for me, when I was around 12 years old, I will end on this, yeah? When I was around 12 years old, I used to think, around that age, I used to sit in the bath and I had this existential crisis. I realized that I was very lonely. Not because I didn't have family and friends, because I said, hold on a second, I'm alone in this bath and I'm not consciously aware of anyone's conscious experience of the people that I love. They're outside of this bath. My friends are outside of my house. I know they should be conscious and alive. I'm aware of my own conscious awareness, but I'm not aware fully, feeling, tasting, experiencing their conscious awareness. And that made me feel extremely lonely, like really lonely. I used to cry, I think, in the bath. I think that really motivated me to always chase meaning, right? To always chase meaning to a certain degree. Meaning was very important to me. That's why relationships were important to me. That's why sometimes communication was important to me. That's why, you know, things that were fake, I didn't really align myself with it. Like, even as a non-Muslim, I wouldn't really go to clubs. Really, I was like, it wasn't my thing, generally speaking. I was more of a person who would maybe sit in a restaurant or maybe sit at a bar and maybe find someone to have a communication with and you know, an interaction that may be meaningful, yeah? So that was my personality. Even now, you know, when you hear sometimes friends or family where they talk about something that's total, like, I'm like, who cares? Yeah. I know it might be abrupt. I'm like, I don't want to hear it. Who cares? This person, Fulana said this, Fulan said this. Nonsense. Yeah. So meaning was very important to me. And I think that has driven me and that drove me to become a Muslim in some way, because the values are meaningful to me. Brotherhood was meaningful to me. And truth was meaningful. That's the ultimate meaning, truth, isn't it? Yeah. So the truth of the Quran, the truth of Allah existing. So that drove me to become a Muslim, I think. And it also drives me now. Because, you know, sharing that which you love and sharing the truth is meaningful. And pursuing the truth is meaningful. And that, for me, just fulfills something that needed to be fulfilled, I guess, based on that kind of crisis. But also, I'm the kind of person that if I loved something, I'm going to share it. I used to love Wing Chun Kung Fu. I love boxing. I love fitness. Sometimes I like share those things because you share things that you love. Right? You know, if you love the Pakistani cricket team, you're going to be like, yeah, Pakistan's in the bad, yeah? You're going to talk about, what's his name? Afridi. Is it Afridi? The handsome one, yeah? MashaAllah. Or who's the captain? Baba Azam, yeah? Baba Azam or whatever. You know, you like these guys because they're great cricket players and you promote it and you wear the shirt and you go to the stadiums because, you know, but what about the deen of Allah? Something that is far more meaningful. So that's what kind of drives me. And obviously you have the motivation, you have the virtues, you have the rewards. You know, if you really believe in Allah's greatness, you believe that Allah is worthy of worship, that you want His word to be the highest. If you don't, then how are you really glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You want His word to be the highest. You want His word to be dominant. You want His truth to pervade, you know, the whole universe and the cosmos and people to understand that this is good for them in the dunya and in the akhirah. And you like discussing this and trying to share this with others. It's just, you know, these things, you get motivated by the more you know Allah, the more you want to share Allah with other people. And the more you know about the virtues of da'wah, the more you want to get involved because the reward is absolutely immense. Now, originally, I wasn't motivated by the reward on itself. It was more driven by meaning and truth and sharing things that you love naturally. But then over time, when you learn more things, you get motivated by the virtues, motivated by the reward, motivated by these things, and also motivated by the fact that it's Allah. SubhanAllah, the greatest being. Allah, the greatest. Allahu Akbar. Allah, who is the only deity worthy of worship, to be recognized, to be adored, to be loved, to be known, to be obeyed, to be submitted to be feared, to direct our internal and external acts of worship alone, our internal and external acts of worship to Allah alone. This is Allah, and you want Allah's greatness to be proclaimed. If you don't want Allah's word to be the highest, then you may have nifaq, which is a scary thing. And the whole of da'wah and making sure that the Islamic worldview is dominant over other worldviews because they're not true and they're not good for humanity. We're good for humanity. We want mercy for people. We want peace for people. We want justice for people. And that comes from Islam. So these things are motivational. And you know what? It could be my temperament as well. I have a particular temperament. Like sometimes I might just be silent. Like once, this was ages ago, before I was really heavily involved in the da'wah, I was watching this African Christian channel. I think it was an African Christian channel and it was like cable at that time. And they started saying some nonsense about Islam. Started shaking. Yeah, I don't usually, I was like shaking. I was like, no. Yeah. I picked up the phone because it was a time when you could call in to those shows. And I used my Christian name, Andreas. And I sat there, I gave them a rant for about 5 minutes. You're lying. This is what you say about jihad. This is what Christianity says, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. I said stuff like that. So I kind of naturally had this physical reaction to people saying falsehood about truth. You know who else had that reaction, which has really increased my love for him a lot? I'm quite close with him. Muhammad Hijab. May Allah bless him. He said this publicly, so I could say this as well. He said this on camera. And I'm going to try and get the story right. If I got it wrong, apologies. But this is the essence of the story. When he started giving lectures at university, he was just giving lectures, right? And there's one particular lecture where there were a lot of feminists in the room, and Muslim feminist women, Muslim feminists, yeah, if there is such a thing, yeah. So basically, he had a conversation with them, and the Muslim sister, I think she was representing the feminists, saying, "Oh, how dare you talk about women's rights? How dare you talk about, women in the Shariah? You're just a man." And generally speaking, feminists say men in powerful positions are inherently oppressive. Social hierarchies with men are inherently oppressive, or they're potentially oppressive and stuff like that. And he was like, and then I think Muhammad Jab said to her, "Well, what about the Prophet ﷺ? He spoke about women." Do you know what she said? He was wrong. Which is kufr. You automatic takfir, really, if you think about it. I mean, unless she's majnoon, yeah? Unless she's insane. That's like takfir. Khalas, yeah. You're a kafira. What else can you say? You say the person is wrong, you're insane. You must be insane, you must be on drugs, or you're just a kafira. You choose, right? Anyway, we don't wish it on her, but she said it. He went home, he couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep the whole night. And I think after a few months, he went to the same university to give a lecture. And he was like kind of on his own, walking to a lecture. And then he opens the door and he sees the Orthodox people debating with these feminists again in the room, I believe. And then he sees that same girl's face. And then hijab starts getting dizzy. And then he's like, oh my God. He runs to the toilet. He felt sick all over the toilet and he fainted. They had to take him to the hospital. Hijab, 6'7", built like a beast, MMA guy, and he's got gorilla strengths. Do you know how much you fall in love with him because he loves the deen so much, it affected his physicality. And that's a rare thing. And that's why you know where he's going. Because the deen is so embedded in his DNA, his spiritual DNA, his essence, his psychology, his bone marrow, that if he can't take things like this, it was like he would vomit. And he told me a similar story of a Somali or Sudanese person he spoke to, like a Bedouin type. And he was trying to explain to him, I think, or in Egypt, he was trying to explain to him that in the West there are people called atheists. And what atheists are, they're like people who reject Allah. That guy, he vomited. He was so shocked, he vomited. That's how strong his fitra was. So anyway, I had not the same reaction, but I was like shaking, yeah? So maybe it was my temperament that I always liked to defend the truth or share the truth and stuff like that. And you know what? I just realized that this has nothing to do with me, bro. It's all Allah at the end of the day. Allah could take it away just like that. And that's why, when it comes to dawah, you have to not have this idea that this is my turf, this is me, I deserve this. Wallahi, I believe I deserve nothing. Wallahi, I believe that. I don't deserve my children, I don't deserve my wife, I don't deserve nothing. How could you? We can't even be thankful enough for a heartbeat, right? If I said you had 10 heartbeats left to live, and to get another 1,000 heartbeats, you have to give me all of your wealth, you would give me all of your wealth. And yet we can't even be thankful for a single heartbeat. Can we individually say Alhamdulillah for every single heartbeat we've had in a lifetime? It's impossible. For the first 2 years we have a backlog. When we're sleeping we have a backlog. Everything above a heartbeat is a bonus. And I really believe, we're in gratitude debt. That's what we are. Now, imagine, now you have Iman. And now you call other people to Iman. It's a huge gift. And then we complain about this, about that. Wallahi, we've misframed everything. So this is a huge gift. It's all Allah. And as Allah said, it wasn't that you that threw, Allah threw. And we should just be grateful that Allah has used us to do that. That's the honor. It wasn't me. The honor is that He's used me that's undeserved, and I'm undeserving of it. And Allah could take it away just like that. And there were times where He nearly took it away just like that, just to remind me what's going on. And it was a dangerous time. There were humiliating moments in my life, to the point I was contemplating on suicide. I wasn't suicidal, but this came to me. It was so low. But that was the greatest moment in my life, actually, because it really shaped everything else after that. Wallahi, it was such a gift. And on the Day of Judgment, I'll probably ask for another 1,000 of those. But yeah, it's all gifts, guys. We can't even be grateful for every conscious moment. If I said you had 10 minutes left to live, but in order to get another 10 hours, you have to give me all of your wealth, you give it to me. And we don't earn or deserve these conscious moments. So if we get something that's priceless at every moment of our existence that we don't earn, own, or deserve, how should it make us feel? Gratitude, grateful to whom? Allah. I'll end on this. If I gave you £1 billion, like literally, I gave you right now £1 billion, how would you feel? Let's be honest. I'll be like, what? No, it took me. And I'll be like elated. It would change your life forever. Correct? You'll probably be in the greatest emotion you've ever experienced. Correct? Okay, hear this now. If I gave you £1 billion and I told you tomorrow morning you're going to wake up with no Iman and you never get it back, would you take the £1 billion? Okay, since you have Iman every day, you should feel more grateful and more happy than getting £1 billion every day. But are we that grateful? It's all about framing. It's all about cognitive and spiritual framing, which the Quran does all the time. When Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet passed away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Kawthar, which is all about abundance, gratitude, and expressing gratitude. Changing and cognitively and spiritually reframing the experience that he had. And we just have to remind ourselves all the time. And, sometimes sessions like this are good reminders. May Allah bless every single one of you. Jazakallah for the opportunity. Any mistakes are obviously mine and shaitan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.